So we are here for a very special event. This week, as everyone in this room probably knows, is the 100th birthday of Tennessee Ernie Ford tomorrow. We have a whole week full of celebrations going on here in Bristol, and this is one of them. We have a great conversation ahead with Sid Oakley from the Bristol Historical Association and Buck Ford, Tennessee Ernie Ford's eldest son. But first, I just have a few housekeeping and a few welcomes and thank yous, and then we will get started. I wanted to first off tell you that this is an event that's co-sponsored by the Birthplace of Country Music and the Bristol Historical Association working together to bring this to you. And it's taken a lot of people on the Centennial Committee many months to come up with this wonderful week of celebrations and birthday honors and wonderful events. And yes. And we are just two of a very big, much bigger group. And one of the people that I want to call out especially is Don Ashley, who is up here in our audience. He is the one that spearheaded the committee, who brought us all together, who kept us moving forward. And without him, certainly we wouldn't be here today. So thank you, Don. We appreciate that. I also want to give a big thank you to Murphy Ford, who has been the person that I've been in contact with the most to be sure that we have some wonderful extra items upstairs in the museum display for this month, and helping to organize and be sure that we were able to get Buck down here, which we are very thrilled about. So thank you to Murphy. For those of you who don't know, there are several other events happening, or one big event happening tomorrow at the Paramount from 2 to 5. And if you are able to, I would really encourage you to go to the Paramount to experience various Tennessee Ernie Ford Show episodes, screening, different specials being screened. That's going to be about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes worth of screenings that we have there. Buck will be there to do a Q&A with the audience and to introduce those films. We'll have some live music from Duty Free, and then most excitingly, we are going to have birthday cake. Donated to us by Food City, so please be sure and come out to the Paramount tomorrow. And a big thank you to Believe in Bristol, who's been very instrumental in organizing that part of our celebration. Finally, for housekeeping, for those of you who don't know, we are recording this live, so please show all your enthusiasm and enjoy it. But if you do need to leave, just try and do so quietly, because we'll be recording. And it's going to be live streaming on Facebook. The restrooms are down the hall and to the left. And when we finish this evening, we will go out the door just outside of this theater rather than going out the front. So we'll have your coats there so you can get out easily. But we will be having a chance for questions. So while you're listening, be sure and have a think about some things that you might want to ask Buck or Sid. And finally, I just want to introduce, first off, Sid Oakley. He is the president of the BHA, the Bristol Historical Association, and a longtime Ford family friend. And he's going to have a few brief remarks. So, Sid. Is it not on?
Hey, Josh. It's on. Thank you. Let's see here.
Yes.
Peggy King says,
Oh,
hey.
oh.
Welcome and thank you for coming on a rainy evening. This is a sellout. There are straggling empty seats, and unless I was doing something really, really important tonight, I may have stayed home too, but I'm glad I'm here. I just want to do a little explanation of some things you need to know before we got started. But, first of all, I started worrying that it would be bucking me up here and about 3 of you out there. And after I learned that it was a sellout, so to speak, I began to worry, well, what if Buck doesn't show up? And then I started going through my notes, and I thought, well, I've got so much to say, we probably won't have time for him anyway. But I want you all to know that, and I'm glad I didn't know these pictures were going to be up here. I want to introduce you to these people because we'll be talking about them tonight. First, I want you to know the reason I'm so good looking is because that, and that are my mother. That's Dorothy, Dottie. Ernie called her Old Dorth and got away with it. This is my dad, Charlie Oakley. And this is Betty Ford right here, Ernie's wife, and I guess that's Betty's arm. Yeah. And I don't have a clue in the world who that other fella is. He just kind of straggled in. And but that right there in the upper left is the living room in which I grew up. Well, I wasn't just in the living room. I was all over the house. But these other three are when the Oakleys were in California, and we'll get to that more later. Now, you also need to know that my dad moved to Bristol from Michigan when he was 17 years old and moved on to Windsor Avenue, pretty close to where my mother was born and raised, and block over from where Ernie grew up. And they all walked to school back then. Ernie and Mother had grown up in Anderson Street Church and gone to Anderson Street School and to Tennessee High, and my dad started walking to Tennessee High, and they got to know each other. Ernie and Dad did. And years later, Ernie told me that the reason they became such friends is because my dad was a Yankee and nobody liked him. And Ernie said, I looked like a Mexican boy, and they didn't care too much for me either. So he said, we just teamed up. Ernie said, Mother and Daddy and Ernie all said that Ernie introduced Dot and Charlie, and I imagine he probably did. There was too many coincidences going on. I want you to know also that I began communicating with Murphy Ford about 4 months ago. Our first email was October the 7th. What she might have told Buck of those emails, I have no idea. She could have been forwarding them to him, which was fine. But then about 2 months ago, Buck and I started emailing back and forth. We agreed that we would not talk on the telephone and that we would not see each other until he's looking at me right now. I saw him coming down the steps a while ago, but I didn't pay any attention to him because I was afraid we'd talk, and I didn't want us to. But this is totally unrehearsed. This is live theater. I don't have a clue what he's going to say, and I don't have much of an idea what I'm going to say. But, and I've got to refer to my notes from time to time, I will tell you also that when I've been putting notes into the computer for weeks and weeks and weeks, and realized the other day that I had 4.5 pages of notes, typewritten. So I thought, I got to trim those notes down. That'll last forever. So I've been working on trimming those notes down for 2 or 3 nights now, and I've gotten those 4.5 pages down to 6 pages. So we'll be here a little shorter time than we might have otherwise. So, Renee, I'm finally through. What do you want to do now?
Well, I actually remembered something I forgot to tell everyone. So before I introduce Buck, I just want to say this. Don Ashley is also the person who is responsible for getting the Tennessee Ernie Ford stamp. He no longer has sheets of the stamps for sale, but he has brought several Tennessee Ernie Ford envelopes that are pre-stamped, and he is selling those afterwards for $5 if anyone's interested. And you can get those specially canceled at the post office tomorrow. And he will also be there selling them at the post office from 9 to 12 tomorrow. So just if you want that little bit of memorabilia, be sure and talk to Don. But without further ado, I want to introduce Buck Ford. He is here with us tonight, and we're thrilled. So come on up, Buck.
Sid, it's been a pleasure. Have a great evening, everyone. Are we sitting here? Yes?
Oh, go ahead.
Good. Good evening, everyone.
Can I say something?
Yes.
We are,
Hey, ladies and gentlemen.
because obviously I am not
Yeah,
used.
earlier.
I'm not used to live, so as you can see. Before we start with their conversation, we actually do have about 7 minutes worth of wonderful home movies that Buck shared with us of the family that we did want to share with you. So before you guys get started, let's do that very quickly.
I know, of course, that you were born in Tennessee. I presume you weren't born on a mountaintop.
Almost, but not quite. It's a beautiful state, but it's very mountainous and hilly. But you're referring to Davy Crockett. But actually, the Davy Crockett Trail was not too far from our old home, where he traveled from Tennessee through into Kentucky and over into Missouri. I live in a very historical part of the United States. Just north of me is Virginia, where the whole thing started, really. Virginia, then you go on further north is Washington, D.C., then into New England, where the Revolutionary War started. And all through my whole area was many battles of what you know as our Civil War. Then we became a union.
How accurate do you think that song Davy Crockett was?
The song was very true, and he did, down not too far from my home, kill the bear when he was a young boy, and the old tree was still standing where he carved his name on it. Davy Crockett killed C-I-L-L-E-D, A-B-A-R, a bar, on this tree, and then the date and so forth.
The Tennessee local is a slow-moving train.
Now, you started your professional career as a disc jockey rather than a singer.
Actually, professional career. When I started in radio, Spencer, there was no such thing as a disc jockey. You were a staff announcer, and you had an 8-hour shift, and whatever was on, there was classical music, there was country music, there was popular music. A minister would make a 30-minute talk, a politician would come in with 30 minutes of time. News. We had the old machines with the yellow sheet of paper that would come to teletype. Local news that would be brought in by people. And I started in radio in 1938 when I was 18 years old. And it was very exciting because radio was very new at that time. So I was a staff announcer, and then after the war, really, after World War II, the term disc jockey came into its own, which I was so glad to hear. It loosened up radio to a great extent.
You'd have been doing the news, the commercials, anything that
Everything within your 8-hour shift, you did it.
So you must have carried quite important things like read the news out during the war.
Oh yes. Well, of course, when the war broke out, I was still working radio in 1941. And then when the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor, well, of course, I'm then about 21 years old, just about. So I enlisted because I didn't want to be drafted. So I enlisted and went in the Air Force, and I flew for 5 years. That was 5 years of quite an experience, but I never lost my love for the communication that was radio at that time.
The Tennessee local is a smoky little pokey little terrain.
great footage there from here, from California. A lot of great footage of Mom and Dad when they were young and life was in front of them. It was a genuine labor of love to assemble all of this. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? Is that better? Okay. You want me to start from the beginning, or am I good right now? It was a genuine labor of love to not only assemble this brief clip, but to go through all of the clips that we were able to find and preserve. And that's just a little taste. I hope that it gave you a brief look into who the real people were. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Oakley.
Are you through?
I am, sir, yes.
Well, let me get into my Tennessee attaché case here just a minute. Buck and I talked via email about a little bit, tiny bit, about the service they had at Anderson Street United Methodist Church Sunday morning in honor and memory of Tennessee Ernie Ford. And I didn't tell Buck this, but I had a rough time. I've had a rough time doing these notes. I can't believe I've been so emotional. Which brings me to this. If you get as emotional as I did Sunday morning, you don't need that. That is not a spittoon. That's a tissue refuse container. I've known Buck all his life because I'm older than he is. I knew his brother Brian, who was younger than both of us. I can't see you all. Yeah, I can. How many knew Brian? A few of you. Brian came to Bristol a lot. We had a lot of fun. You want to tell us about Brian?
Brian was my younger brother. He was 3.5 years younger than me, and was possessed of nuclear fission for energy. He was as brilliant and funny as he was completely incorrigible, and I miss him greatly. We lost Brian in 2010, and I would give anything, frankly, if he was here tonight. And I would also give that same if 3 other people were here tonight, and that's my 2 sons, James and Tucker, and my daughter, Jessie. And I know that they are here in spirit, wishing their grandfather a happy 100th birthday.
I'm sure they would, and we all loved Ernie. A lot of us knew him, saw him, appreciated his talent.
Excuse me, are you not wearing any socks tonight?
No, sir, I'm not. Are you?
Yes. Yes, I am. It's like raining out there.
Well, I know, but how do your feet know
this
that?
This is a Santa Monica thing. This is not a. This is a Palm Springs fashion. This is not Bristol.
Buck, I wear socks when I'm an usher at church. I hate wearing socks.
Well, I'm going to remember this for the rest of the week.
Well, you'll be able to see them.
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see anything except.
I get hot when I laugh.
You're hot particularly. I mean, it's.
I set myself up for that. Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about my recollections of your dad. I've told you how my parents met him and so forth, but my parents stayed in touch with Ernie and Betty. Betty was a wonderful lady. I knew her. She didn't come to Bristol as much as your dad, nor did she go anywhere else as much as your dad. He was on the road trying to make a living.
That's right.
She had 2 boys to raise, but I'm sure I was around Ernie earlier than my earliest memory, but I will tell you that I do remember his being in Bristol, and I put the pieces together, and it was 1956. Mm-hmm. I mentioned briefly that Ernie and Mother grew up in the church, Anderson Street, and my dad started going there, and I grew up there, and So in '56, he came over to church and sang in the choir that Sunday, along with your grandparents, Malden T.C.
Yes, sir.
They
Yes, sir.
sang in the choir for years. And when it was over, I went back to the choir room. I'm like 9 years old, and I said, could I have your autograph, Mr. Ford? And he said, Mr. Ford's that man over there that looks like me and a little bit taller. I'm Ernie. And everybody laughed, and he signed the church bulletin. And on the way home that day, my dad said, Sid, don't ask Ernie for his autograph anymore. He's family. I remember your grandma long out on Bluntwell Highway in that little garage apartment house.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I mean, look, I remember. There's an old man. I remember his grandmother. That makes me a pretty old man, too. But I remember your dad being honored on This Is Your Life.
Yes, sir.
They actually came to Bristol with a moving van and took Malden T.C. Ford's living room furniture to California and set it up there and surprised Ernie with a segment on This Is Your Life. And I remember that well.
Oh, it was an amazing telecast. Ralph Edwards was very well known in Hollywood at the time for surprising a lot of folks, and in the middle of their lives, in the middle of their careers. And one of the most critical elements of this whole broadcast was that entire set, the entire living room of the Windsor house, of Grandma and Grandpa's house, was rebuilt in the soundstage directly adjacent to where the Ford show was being taped. And it was everything that everybody could do to keep Ernest Ford from going into Studio B, from A, and walking into his own house where he was born. And it was a remarkable moment on live television when Ralph walked onto the set and presented Dad with the book and then walked him into that set that had been secret for all those months.
You know, for your dad to walk into that set may have caused him to go stark raving crazy to see his parents' living room right there next door.
Well, you know, what took him back the most was less the fact that, as you said, they brought the furniture, everything that comprised the living room. They'd also found the exact same print of the wallpaper and wallpapered that entire wall in the soundstage. But what had really shocked Dad was that his grandmother, Nancy Long, whom they had also flown out, first time she'd ever been on an airplane. And the one question that Nancy Long had for the flight attendants on that flight was, could they bring her something for the tobacco that she was chewing? She kept a plug in her jaw till the day she died.
I bet she did.
And literally could dent a fender. When Dad walked out onto that soundstage and saw his grandmother in that room that had been recreated, that took him back. That was a moment.
I bet it did. I need to pause a moment. When I was standing here before you were introduced, it was the hardest thing in the world for me not to look over there because I knew you were over there. And now I'm seeing Murphy right there. I just got to say, hi, Murphy. Welcome to Bristol. Welcome back to Bristol. Another visit. Your mother and Dad both came to Bristol in the 50s. And I remember they're coming to our house on Florida Avenue one morning. Mother cooked a great old big country breakfast, and we went to the old country club across the street where First Presbyterian Church is now. I don't mean to be ignoring you all. To play golf on that 9-hole golf course. And my brother David caddied for Ernie, and I caddied for your mother. And a couple of other guys caddied for...
Mom played golf?
Yes, she did.
My mother.
I don't remember her playing bad either.
Betty
Bud.
Ford?
Yeah. Well, I taught her right before we teed off. I did. Maybe, I don't know. I doubt it. But she did. As a matter of fact, I couldn't find the picture, but I've got a photograph somewhere, and I will send it to you, of us walking from one hole to the other, and she's playing the role anyway. So I'll see what happens. I don't want to do all the talking. You did say Mother played golf. Well, that's enough.
Well, you know, you were mentioning about coming back to Tennessee, and actually the first time that Mom came back with Dad was right after World War II. Dad came back for a brief period of time to work at WOPI right after World War II ended. He was preparing to ship out in a B-17 for duty when the war ended. And Mom was on a train preparing to come to Florida from Los Angeles to be with him before he took off for Pacific duty when the war ended. And immediately after the war, he was offered a job at WOPI back here, where he had worked when he was just fresh out of high school, first radio job he'd ever had. And Mom and Dad drove back here from Florida. She took the train to Florida. They reunited. The war was over. The country was jubilation. And they drove from Florida, from McClellan, here to Bristol, where he went to work for WOPI. Bristol at the time was a different town than it is today. And it, after a brief period of time, became a very difficult place for Betty Ford to find a decent martini in. And
oh, it was different in that respect.
And that search led her to meet one of her longest and dearest friends, Judy Hicks, who was also looking for a decent martini somewhere in Bristol. They both had a lifelong love of vodka and gin, and a lifer longer love of profanity.
Oh, no.
And these long nights where Dad was doing the graveyard shift at WOPI, Mom and Judy Hicks found ways to find what they needed and speak in the tongue that they were known to speak in. And that trip only lasted a brief period of time, because within 6 months after he had begun work with WOPI after the war back here, he was offered a job at KFXM in Southern California, where during the war he had done Armed Forces Radio Network broadcasts from that same studio. They needed somebody that could convey reports to the front, that could convey commercials, could do PSAs for the troops, and Ernie Ford had that voice. He had that training. And thank you, sir. And so they threw Judy Hicks in the car with them. She wanted to go see California, and they drove back out west. The second time that he came back here with Mom was in '53, when they were on their way to England for his command performance at the London Palladium. And they came back here, and I stayed with Grandma and Grandpa for that brief period of time while they flew on to England. And that was a standing room only performance by Dad. He did 2 weeks there, 2 shows a day for 12 days in a row. And every single show at the London Palladium sold out. It was incredible.
That's amazing. Not a lot of entertainers can say that.
It was amazing.
That's great. Fabulous. And I'm sure he was exactly the same Tennessee Ernie Ford there as he was in San Francisco or on Anderson Street.
Well, you know, by '53 was 2 years before 16 Tons was recorded. By '53, his profile, his brand, his star, if you will, was rising extremely fast. He signed with Capitol Records in January of 1949, and on the day that he signed, he recorded his first single, Milk 'Em in the Morning Blues. And they literally...
Excuse me, but Milk 'Em
in the Morning Blues. And this was an Ernie Ford original.
I imagine so.
And it was a #1 hit song.
Was it really?
And it was the very first song he recorded the very first day he signed with the label. And the label and the group that worked him and worked for him put their foot pedal to the metal from January of '49 up until 1955 when he recorded 16 Tons. It had been non-stop. And in '53 when he did the command performance at the London Palladium, that propelled him. He was already a bigger artist in Europe than he was in America.
Is that right?
Absolutely. And to this day, in Europe, Ernie Ford's early material before 16 Tons was cut, his material that he cut between 49 and 53, 54 in that area when it was hardcore country boogie and extremely raw, very, very, very unique, different brand of music with instrumentation that was not heard anywhere else, had brought him a string of hit singles and made him an in-demand act that propelled him after that London show. Today, that early era of music, there are people in England, music devotees, who can tell you what color socks he was wearing in 1954 when he went in and cut River of No Return, or when he was on the piano with Fingers Carlisle cutting Blackberry Boogie. There are people over there who are as devoted to that era of his music as many people are here to the era of his gospel recordings. And it has kept his profile, his image, and his music very much alive throughout the world because of that kind of devotion.
Well, it will remain alive for many, many years to come because it's timeless, and we love it. You brought up the subject of adult beverages. I'm going to skip forward and tell you a story about adult beverages. Ernie loved to go to the Peerless Steakhouse in Johnson City. And as you walk in the door, his photograph's on 2 walls, and there's a lot of other celebrities pictured, but I think he's the only one that's got 2 photographs there. And we were down there. They had little private rooms, which they still do in the new restaurant. We were in a private room, and I don't know who was there. I'm sure Dot and Charlie and Ernie and Red. And Jim Lokes equals Red, same guy, Ernie's longtime manager. And some other people. And alcoholic beverages in Johnson City or anywhere in this area at that time, which was probably in the they were as illegal as murder. And we're just having a hooping and hollering big time in that room, and all of a sudden the door opened, and there stood a highway patrolman about 8 feet tall. And he said, "Excuse me, but Governor Buford Ellington wondered if he might come in and say hello to Mr. Ford." So the governor of the state of Tennessee walks into this den of sin we had created. And it was like a speakeasy, Buck. I mean, so Buford Ellington was a tall man, and I don't know what that has to do with anything, but he and Ernie act like they'd met before, and I'm sure they had, and hey, doing good to see you.
Buford, how long, oh, how long, Ellington.
Right. And they left, and we all say, "Do you realize what just happened? We're in here drinking liquor," and I wasn't. I probably wasn't. I don't think I was old enough to drink it in that setting. But so anyway, to make a long story longer, we talk about, do you realize that the highway patrol and the governor just caught us drinking liquor in this town, which doesn't even have package stores or anything else, and blah, blah, and we're just all amazed. Well, in a minute, there's a knock on the door. Yeah, here's the raid, folks. Get ready. The police are here. And the door is open, and the highway patrolman's back, and we're and the highway patrolman said, "Excuse me, but the governor was wondering if he might have a little drink of bourbon." I promise.
He was known to do that, too.
We had a good time. So, what do you want to say while I look at what I want to say?
Well, I'm just looking at the book you're holding. It's
Oh, okay. Ernie and Betty came to Bristol in 1961, summer of 61, both of them. And I don't know why, but I'm glad they did. I'm really glad they did, and I'm fixing to tell you why. Ernie and my dad got to talking about the fact, maybe it was spring of 62, that in August of 62, the Ford family was going to sail out of San Francisco on a cruise ship to Hawaii and back. And they would be gone about 2 weeks, middle 2 weeks of August. And he said, "Charlie, would you all like to come out 1st of August and spend the whole month of August in our home in, what is it? You call it Menlo Park?"
Portola Valley, Palo Alto.
Palo Alto. And we'll be gone 2 weeks. You can mess around with Red, do what y'all want to do. You know, clean the house from time to time and feed the steer and the horses down in the barn
right.
lot.
Yes, I remember.
And so forth and so on. So my dad said, "Can I bring David and Sid?" Ernie said, "Well, sure you can." But David was in college. He didn't want to go. And so it's okay. I went with my parents to California. And it was just a piece of my life, jerked out of the normal daily activities that I did and remember. Held out for a month and put back as if nothing happened, and created a memory I'll never forget as long as I live. But you remember all that? I've got a picture of you and Brian in the living room.
Those years, that in the house that you came to, the house that Sid is talking about is a house that Mom and Dad built just south of San Francisco. This house was the culmination, really, of a dream that they had together. Hollywood had been very, very good to the family, but it had also exacted a number of costs to the family. And those costs were principally in the form of Dad's belief that the town was exacting a thing on his family. He saw an underside of Hollywood that for all of the success and all of the good things, he saw an underbelly there that really placed him kind of ahead of his time. There were, a great many people 25 years ago where it was a big move was to get out of Hollywood. Stars were leaving Hollywood to come to Colorado, to come to Nashville, to go to New York, to get out of the machine that Hollywood was. And Northern California had offered both Mom and Dad a different vision of their lives. And it was a unique period of time because while they were in the course of purchasing the property south of San Francisco, one of the most beautiful cities in the world still today, one of the greatest cities in the world. And it was a city that they fell in love in again. And they found a piece of property. And while the building began, Dad secretly began the plans to leave NBC. And this was something that was known to only a handful of people. And it was an incredibly delicate situation because at the time, the Ford Show was the #1 half-hour variety show in the country. It was the only half-hour variety show to have ever unseated Playhouse 90 and a number of the other biggest programs of the day. And the Ford Show was broadcast from October 4th of 56 to June 29th of 1961, 193 episodes, 130 of Hollywood's biggest, most legendary stars guested on that show. And because it by the way, and it was called the Ford Show not because of Dad. It was called the Ford Show because it was Ford Motor Company's entry into primetime television to compete with the Dinah Shore Chevy show. Ford Motor Company needed somebody that they could come into that arena with and compete with her. Nobody at Ford Motor Company believed that Dad's last name was really Ford.
They just made that up, right?
And a meeting in Detroit, which involved scores of advertising agents from J. Walter Thompson, NBC executives, Ford executives, in a conference room as long as from, here to Abingdon. And at one point in time, Dad, who was down at this end, took his driver's license out. And he stood up and he pitched that driver's license down that long table, and he said, "Show the man at the head trough what my name is." And the Ford Show became the #1 half-hour variety show in the country. We were blessed a number of years ago, and it propelled Dad into a different level of celebrity, where the daytime television show had been seen by largely an audience of forgive my use of a dinosaur term, housewives at the time. The Ford Show, as a primetime show, propelled him to an audience he had not known before. And the audience of primetime television was very different. The Ford Show was a different kind of entertainment for a number of reasons. The success of it became a weighty thing for Dad. When the Ford Show began, he was also under contract to CBS Radio, ABC Radio. He was under contract to NBC Television to do the morning show. He was touring, and he was doing the Ford Show every Thursday night. He was doing the daytime show every day. He was doing radio every day. He was touring. He was doing clubs or stadiums when he wasn't in front of the mic or in front of the camera. And all to come around, that pace by the early 1960s had become almost untenable for him.
Oh, I'm certain.
And they began looking for a way out. And it became an incredible event in television history, that one of those events that no one knew about because it had been secret, when he told the NBC executives who had come to the house with contracts to secure him for another 2 years, for him to tell them that night, "I'm building a house. I'm out of here." The Ford Show was not only in a position of hanging from a thread. Ford Motor Company, NBC, not only did they not look for another host, the Ford Show itself was canceled and never renewed again.
What year was that?
That was in 1961.
Well, my parents and I went into San Francisco in August of '62. I'm not arguing.
No. What happened? Let me tell you what happened. During the course of the building of the house, what no one at NBC knew was that Dad was in secret negotiations with ABC. Okay. And within days after the Ford Show closed down, they were in rehearsals for the daytime show in San Francisco on KGO, which only lasted for 2 years. But there was no way that he could completely leave television. He had become too much of an integral part of people's lives. Television did this in those decades. They made entertainers that came into our homes, our living rooms, our kitchens. They made them parts of our families. They were as familiar to us as our own family members were. Many of those early entertainers were. And Ernie Ford occupied a very vaulted seat among those entertainers. He was as much a part of people's families as he was a part of of the weekly lineup on television. And that kind of personality, the Ford Show was very different. You know, it was called the Ford Show because of Ford Motor Company, and Ernie Ford, within the first 2 years, became known as the man who created more ulcers among advertising agents than anybody, because it was only one sponsor. And, you know, they were generally 2-minute long commercials. And they would get with Dad before the show, and they would say, Ernie, you need to look here. Ernie, look here. It's got fins in the back, and Ford, fins in the back, and it's got a thing with a deal, and you do the bit over here, and he's gone. And when the commercial would happen, these guys would sit in front of the set and just plow aspirin into their mouths because they didn't know what he was going to say. And Ernie Ford, in his own way, sold more Fords off of showroom floors by being his unscripted self. And again, when he left, and Ford no longer was a regular sponsor, it sent that end of the industry into a very different tailspin. It had marked a lot of high ground, the Ford Show did. You know, it was the very first network television show to ever include Songs of Faith in its regular lineup. When Dad and Cliffy Stone, am I talking too much?
You're getting close.
Okay. Am I talking too much? When Dad and Cliffy Stone began their career together in Placentia, California, with Hometown Jamboree. Hometown Jamboree, you know, was very active towards the end of the war, at the closing of World War II. It was called Hometown Jamboree because it became a home. The stadium, the Almonte Legion Auditorium, became a place where people from all over the country who would come to Southern California to work in the defense industry could come and meet one another. And it was a family reunion kind of atmosphere. And every show, 3,000 people at the Almonte Legion Auditorium, every show, Cliffy and his band and Dad would close that night of the dances with a hymn. Somebody asked Cliffy why he did that every night, and he said, because I'd rather send people out with a hymn knowing there won't be any fistfights in the parking lot than send people out with a bottle.
Hey, Buck, all I did was say, I don't mean to be argumentative, but in August of '62, we went into San Francisco, and you've been talking for 10 minutes. All I was going to say was, hey, Murphy, I see you over there. Go, no. If I really felt that was a problem, I wouldn't have said a thing in the world about it. But we went into town and attended the taping or the broadcast or whatever
At
you
KGO Studios.
Yeah.
Yes.
And y'all remember Jim Lang from The Dating Game? He was Ernie's announcer and sidekick.
He was the sidekick, yes.
Okay. And Ernie said, I've got my friends here from Bristol, Tennessee. And he said those two words on television, Bristol, Tennessee, a lot. And we all appreciated it. But anyway, he said Dot and Charlie Oakley and their son Sid are out there. They didn't put the camera on us, but I sure was proud to hear him acknowledge our presence. But I'm getting to a question. First, Charlie Weaver was on the show that morning.
Yes.
And
Cliff Arquette.
Cliff Arquette, you probably remember him from Hollywood Squares. And Molly B. Was she a protege of your dad, or?
She was a protege of Cliffy Stone.
Oh, okay.
She was discovered at the same time that he discovered Tommy Sands. They were the teenage idol singers that Cliffy discovered.
Well, she was easy to look at.
She was.
And she was in a play at the Sheraton Palace Hotel, a theater in the Round, that we attended. And that created a nice memory. I've gotten away from my notes. Buck, I need to get some things. I need to make some confessions. And your dad isn't here, and your mother's, my parents, and nobody's here but you and me. But while we were in California, I did some things that.
That was you?
Yeah. That was kind of it was kind of Brian-like stuff, you know. But you remember Dino?
Very well.
Dino was the golden retriever. I've got a picture of Dino and Sid in the pool. I'm confessing that. Cletus the cat. Cletus and I went swimming too. I was 15 years old, 6 months away from having a driver's license, and while you all were in Hawaii, I drove your black Lincoln Continental, your red Ford Thunderbird convertible, your blue Ford Country Squire wagon, and your blue Ford four-wheel drive pickup truck. So I'm not through, but there's some of what I need to confess. So, and I've got a picture of those 4 cars lined up. Picture, photograph. It just dawned on me the only reason I got to go to California was as the photographer. I'm not in any of these pictures. I'm taking the pictures. Your dad made arrangements for us to, I'm bragging now, to go sailing on San Francisco Bay.
Wow.
With the president of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce and his wife. He made arrangements for us to go to a neighbor's house and to a cocktail party or neighborhood gathering. My dad had on a sport coat, and it was kind of hot. We were inside the house and outside the house, and the hostess said, Charlie, would you like to take off your coat? He said, no, ma'am, I don't have a back in my shirt. He was nuts, too. And, you know, whatever happened. In a little while, she said, Charlie, what do you mean you don't have a back in your shirt? He said, well, my son Sid works at a funeral home. And he made arrangements for I'm treading lightly, but he made arrangements for us to go to the home of 3 generations of women. The middle woman was Beverly Smith. I don't remember Beverly's mother's name. Beverly's daughter was Stephanie, and she was my age. So Stephanie and I had a party at your house when you were gone. But now Dot and Charlie were there, but you need to know these things. And
I knew none of this.
I know you didn't. How could you? Your parents didn't know it. I didn't tell them. But I don't remember what else we did out there. It was
Which is
fabulous.
probably a good thing.
Yeah, it might be. It was fabulous. This ranch style, do you call that a horseshoe-shaped house with a huge tree in the front yard, set up on a plateau, and you go down into the barn lot, and there's a big steer you boys were raising to sell,
Yes,
I
sir.
guess,
Yes,
and
sir.
some horses.
Yes, sir.
And when you all were in Hawaii, I got to sleep in your room, but when you were there, I got to sleep in the barn. I did. I slept in the. Thanks a lot. I'd have slept in one of the cars to do what we did out there, but let's see. You know, it's fun. No, I started to say it's funny, and then a memory came to mind that's not funny, and I've got to tell this.
4th thing to go, you know.
Yeah, I thought it was second. I don't want to hear about it. My dad died in 1972 at 53 years old. Just bam, sitting in his easy chair, gone. And it was Wednesday before Easter. And when we got settled down a little bit, first telephone call I made was to my brother David in Arkansas to tell him that our dad had died and that the funeral was going to be Friday, Good Friday, because we didn't want, I don't know why, but I kind of think it might have been because we didn't want to cloud the memory of every Easter the rest of our lives with his funeral. The second telephone call I made was to the home of Betty and Ernie Ford. And Betty, your mother answered the phone, and I said, Betty, this is Sid Oakley. And she said, I remember this. Oh, Sid, how you what's wrong? And I said, I need to speak to Ernie. And he picked the phone up like that. He must have been standing there. And I told him about my dad's death. This is Wednesday night, about 11 o'clock. The funeral's at 2 o'clock Friday. Friday morning, Ernie and Jim Lokes were at Mother's house. My dad had a huge funeral. I never knew whether it was because he died at the age of 53 or he had a lot of friends or because Ernest J. Ford was listed in the paper as a pallbearer. Maybe all three. But Ernie was a pallbearer. He did not sing. We didn't ask him to sing. He rode in the family car. And if there's anything that tells how close my parents and your parents were, it's that.
It's a great memory to have, sir.
I'm sure I've got a lot of other things, but I want to jump forward. I want to interject. After my dad died, Ernie's visits to Bristol didn't cease, nor did his telephone calls, and I kind of became the substitute guy to talk to in Bristol.
Very much.
We had some great times.
You were the touchstone.
Touchstone. Thank you. What does that mean? In 1991, in April of 91, we had the rededication or the dedication of the renovated Paramount Theater. And Ernie Ford was the star of the show. He was the man that came to stand on the stage and give the Paramount a kickoff that would be remembered. And were you there? I missed that, but I was home watching Dragnet. Ernie wanted me to pick him up at the Holiday Inn that morning and take him to see the Paramount, which I did, and we go in and we look around, and he and I were just, it's beautiful, beautiful. So do you remember the bass player that came up to play for Ernie? Hey, we wouldn't know him anyway, but
not offhand.
Ernie's.
Now, Lloyd Wells was the guitar player.
But he played a bass. Well, maybe it was
guitar.
Guitar
Player.
Thank you. Lloyd Wells. So when Ernie got comfortable with the feel of the Paramount, he said, could we walk up State Street here a ways? And we did. And we start walking, just the two of us. And I said, Ernie, what all you going to sing tonight? And he said, 16 tons. I said, oh, man, that's great. I can't think of anything else that would be more appropriate. And I said, what else you going to sing? He said, that's it. That's it. But so we walk on, and I muster up the guts to say, Ernie, people are paying a lot of money to come tonight. I think they're going to expect a lot more than one song. And he said, trust me, it'll be okay. And that night at the Paramount Theater, who else could have gotten up on stage in front of people that had paid a lot of money to come and sung one song? But it took him about an hour and a half to do it. I don't know. If he thought that up, he was really a great whatever that would be, because he sang a verse, and he sat on a stool, sang a verse, sat there and talked, and then all of a sudden he'd start singing another verse, and Lloyd Wells would chime in and guitar in, and it did last a while. It was absolutely fabulous. He wanted to go to the Bonfire Restaurant on Volunteer Parkway when that was over, and we did. And I took him back to the Holiday Inn. That's the last time I ever saw him in my life. He left Bristol and he never came back. 6 months later, he went to Glory Land. Now, what do you want to say?
You know, that was a meaningful trip for Dad to come back here, and some of the best photographs of his later years in life were taken during that trip back here. And it was in October when he and Beverly visited the Bushes in Washington.
State dinner.
State dinner. And
I said state dinner, and Mr. and Ms. Ernest J. Ford were invited by George H.W. Bush to attend a state dinner at the White House.
yes,
Y'all need to know that.
yes. He never made it out of Dulles. He collapsed in Dulles and was taken to the Reston Hospital. And not many people know this, but Dad passed away on October 17th of 1991, and that was 36 years to the day after the release of 16 Tons. October 17th, 1955. And that's a portentous day for me.
You know, we all remember where we were when we learned that President Kennedy had been assassinated, and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, and when Elvis died. But I was coming back from Castlewood, Virginia, and I was about in Hansonville, which is where one road dead ends into the other, Buck. I don't know why it got a name. I was listening to a radio station, and all of a sudden Ernie Ford is singing Precious Memories, and I knew what the next words I heard were going to be. But I was mighty fortunate to know Ernie Ford and to have the memories of him and his family, of you and Brian and your mom.
The fortune is all mine, my friend.
Before what?
The fortune is all mine.
Well, you are fortunate. And, you know, I didn't know what he meant. Excuse me. But it is the truth. I thought you meant being Ernie's son, but I was no more selected to know Ernie Ford or blessed to know Ernie or whatever than I was cursed not to have known Elvis that way. But I want to say this. Ernie taught me, without knowing it, two things. He taught me that he wasn't any more important than anybody else on this earth. And I don't think any other celebrities any more important than anybody else on this earth. He also taught me to treat everybody the same, from the CEO to the janitor. And the way he taught me that was he treated them that way, number one. And number two, he didn't care who bought his records. He didn't care if it was a billionaire or a guy that had to borrow the money to do it. But he appreciated every sale. And he was one fantastic human being.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you, my friend. Thank you, brother.
Are we finished? I'm not finished, but are you finished? Wait a minute, huh? Y'all got any questions? I'll bring the mic to you. Don't ask me anything. I told you all I knew.
I mean, I think we just need to start a TV show called The Buck and Sid Show, actually.
Notice that the initials are BS.
Yeah, I did that on purpose. But we would like to open up and give you all a chance to ask both Sid and Buck some questions about some of the memories they have, some of the things they didn't get a chance to talk about. So who would like to start us off?
Well, I didn't get a chance to talk about much.
Yeah, so if you want to concentrate on Buck.
Anybody have any questions?
Yep.
Make them easy, he ain't too bright.
Where did the Tennessee pea picker come from? Because we don't grow peas around here.
Honey, I'm going to come up there with you. Say again?
Where did the Tennessee pea picker come from? Because we
good
don't
question.
grow peas in Bristol.
Good question. This is an interesting story, and it's a story that most people get wrong, actually. That persona, the pea picker, began in the late 1940s. And many, many, many people for years, including a lot of publicity people in Hollywood that believed that their job was to craft a thing for Ernie Ford from where he came from. Well, they all crafted the story that he'd been born next to a pea patch back here in Bristol. Nothing could have been further from the truth, but here was the truth. In the late 1940s, Southern California was the bedrock of life for tens of thousands of Okie and Arkie migrants that came to Southern California. Many of those people that came in the first wave after the Dust Bowl stayed and were followed by family following the beginning of World War II, when many people came to Southern California to work in the defense industry. Among those people who settled in Southern California after the war were a group of people who worked one of the most vibrant crops in all of the Inland Empire, and it was the simple garden green pea. The migrant workers that flooded those valleys and camped in those valleys were regarded in Southern California by the media and by folks who didn't get their hands dirty as a very, very, very low class of people. They were derided. They were mocked in the press. They were considered a base group of people. They were called pea pickers because that's what they did, and that was the best name that the press and the public at large could give them. And that term became a term of derision. When Ernie Ford began in radio at KFXM and KXLA, he began in the late 1940s, and he had an instinctive feel for who his audience was on the Ethernet of the radio. And he knew that many of those camps of folks, one of whom you all have seen this photograph by the great photographer Dorothea Lange, who took a photograph of a bedraggled mother with two children across her. And it was simply called Migrant Mother. That photograph was taken in Nipomo, California, and that woman was a pea picker. Ernie Ford knew who those people were. He knew the value of the work that they brought to the Inland Empire. He knew that they were a people he could relate to. He knew they were a people that his wife Betty and her family could relate to. So when he began his dual personality as a radio announcer with Tennessee Ernie and Bar Nothing Ranch Time, he didn't invite everybody to come into the bunkhouse to listen. He invited all you pea pickers out there, because those were the folks that were huddled around their radios in work camps throughout Southern California that would listen to him, listen to the music, and listen to somebody they believed understood them, knew who they were. Before long, the power of that moniker became so overwhelming in radio that before long, people who wouldn't have dreamed of it were hoping to be called a pea picker themselves. And before long, he became the old pea picker. And that's right, and that's the story of how pea picker came to be.
I need to ask him a question. Buck, I know there was the Bedford Corporation, Betty Ford.
Yes.
And I know there is Tennessee Ernie Ford Enterprises.
Yes.
Can you tell us, I know Renee's getting nervous about this going on till morning, but tell us the status of Tennessee Ernie Ford Enterprises and how it's going.
I will tell you the status of Tennessee Ernie Ford Enterprises by introducing Murphy Ford again, who is the president of Tennessee Ernie Ford Enterprises and the individual that she is the curator of the career of Ernest Jennings Ford. She is the business manager. She is the individual that's making sure I know where I'm going this week. And
I gathered as such.
She is the strongest individual that I know and the best friend I believe I've ever had in my life. And I couldn't be more fortunate, and Dad could not be more fortunate to have Murphy managing and curating and holding that legacy as dear as she does. Couldn't do it without her, period.
So can a person go on the internet to TEF, Tennessee Ernie Ford Enterprises?
Well, you go to ernieford.com, and that's a simple thing. And, of course, for the past month, you've been able to also go to ernieford100.com, which was put together by the Celebration Committee, the Centennial Committee. And before Renee kicks us all out, I'm going to echo Renee. I am a bit overwhelmed right now. I am been overwhelmed for the past couple of weeks by the amount of work. I simply cannot thank properly. I don't have the vocabulary to adequately thank the scores of people, the folks that have put in so much effort, so much work, so much time, so much dedication to honoring my father. I cannot tell you how grateful I am. So all that I can do to everyone that's listening, to everyone here tonight, is to tell you how deeply, deeply grateful I am, and what a phenomenal honor this is to be seated with all of you and Sid. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Buck. Now, may I? Now, wait a minute.
Yes, I went to work at a grocery store in Bristol, Tennessee, and I think your dad was friends with this man, Beverly Furra Supermarket.
Yes, sir.
And I remember when you and your brother used to come to Bristol, this would have been 63, 64, 65, and spend time with your grandparents.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And I saw you in that store, and I used to bag your grandparents' grocery, and I sold them a grit newspaper.
I appreciate that so much.
And I think your dad used to come in there and do promotions for Beverly Furra.
He did. Yes, he did. I've got a couple of pictures of him handing out frozen bags of peas to folks.
Hey, my aunt lived out in the country, out the road that would go, it ended up there. But she used to listen to Ernie all the time, and so he used to ask people questions and sending me funny things, and I want to have the whole world connected to Bristol and to this area. Do you know anything? And so she called him up one day and said, "This is Pat Rouse from the area outside Bristol, close to King College, called Goose Pimple Junction." And he thought that was one of the funniest things he'd heard.
What a wonderful pleasure to have you here tonight, ma'am. It's great to see you.
Does anybody else?
No.
How did your parents meet?
I'm sorry?
How did your parents meet?
Oh, great story. Dad, when World War II began, Dad was doing radio at WROL in Knoxville. And when Pearl Harbor was bombed, Dad was doing his morning radio show, and they threw a teletype in front of him. And my father, Ernest Ford, broke the story of the attack on Pearl Harbor in the southeastern United States on WROL. Within hours after that had occurred, he went down and enlisted in the Army and was eventually shipped out to Southern California to Victorville Army Air Base, where he became a bombardier instructor out there. He was one of the first people to work with the Norden bomb sight, which was really the first onboard flight computer in modern warfare. It changed the dynamic of the war for American forces. And Ernie Ford was an instructor, taught cadets how to work that computer. There was only one woman on the entire base, and she was the wing commander's secretary, and her name was Betty Jean Heminger. And one afternoon, a bombardier instructor pulled himself up, pulled his britches up, and took a piece of Maud Ford's applesauce cake in his pocket as a bribe to get some carbon paper from her. A year and a half later, they were married, and they were married for 46 years, and that's my mother and father.
Anybody else have a question or a memory? Okay.
This man right up here.
All right, I'll go there, and
Oh,
then
he's
I'll come
pointing.
over to you.
They're all
Emmett.
pointing. People are pointing.
This was just an early memory from when I was a kid, but my dad, I remember laughing hysterically watching your father as Cousin Ernie on Lucille Ball.
Oh, and I Love Lucy.
On I Love Lucy. And I was just curious, how did that happen? How did that hookup happen?
That's a great question. You know, and to this day, not a lot of people are aware that first appearance on I Love Lucy was the very first two-part episode that was ever filmed for I Love Lucy. Cousin Ernie visits and Cousin Ernie hangs on, if you remember. And Dad at the time was very big on Hometown Jamboree. His pea-picker persona, the hillbilly, was very, very, very big on Hometown Jamboree television. It became so big that he received a summer replacement guest host gig replacing Kay Kaiser on the College of Musical Knowledge. This is ancient television. And if you remember those days, College of Musical Knowledge was the forerunner of Name That Tune. And Professor Ford did his stint. And one afternoon, one of the people that just happened to stop by the studio was Desi Arnaz. And he watched Dad's bit as Professor Ford on the College of Musical Knowledge. And he brought Lucille Ball the next day. And they watched and they fell in love, and they went to Trader Vic's and they convinced Dad to bring that character to the show. They wrote 2 entire episodes around him. And they became the #1 I Love Lucy episodes for 5 years. Nothing topped them. And to this day, Cousin Ernie is still one of the greatest characters of live television. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Good.
What is the total number of record
Wait, I have to come over there. It's my bad ear.
What is the total number of record sales of 16 Tons to date, and who wrote that song?
16 Tons was written by one of America's treasures, a man by the name of Merle Travis, who wrote 16 Tons in 1946. 16 Tons to date, according to a man I had the great pleasure of being with last night on WSM Radio, Eddie Stubbs, 16 Tons has sold more than 128 million copies since its initial release. That is a rough estimate. There are a lot of folks that think it was much bigger, has sold many more copies. 16 Tons was an accident. It was a song that came about as the result of a number of different conflicts. Most people don't know this story. Am I running long? Are we okay? Okay. Merle Travis was a folk singer, country singer from Muhlenberg County, Kentucky. His father worked in the coal mines, and Merle came to Hollywood as a singer and a picker. He had been a decorated serviceman in the Army in World War II. And after the war, in 1946, he was signed to Capitol Records about 3 years before Dad was, as a singer, guitar player. And in August of 46, Cliffy Stone, who was an A&R man for Capitol Records at the time, came to Travis and he said, we want you to do an album of folk songs. Burl Ives is doing these, Pete Seeger's doing, I need you to write some folk songs. So Travis went back to his place and wrote a handful of songs and gathered a handful of traditional folk songs. And the result of that session was the very first boxed set release ever recorded and released in American music. And it was called Folk Songs from the Hills. There were 4 long-playing 78 LPs in accordion sleeves in the box. Among that group of songs was a song called No Vacancy that became a very big hit for Merle. It was a song, however, that took the American government to task for not having adequate housing for servicemen after World War II. And that song's popularity also put a spotlight from the House Un-American Activities Committee onto Merle Travis for taxing the government vocally, popularly, in a popular song. 2 other songs in that album were Dark as a Dungeon, a song about the life of miners, and a song called 16 Tons that spoke of really indentured servitude in America by miners who could not afford to pay for the provender that they needed to support their families and literally became prisoners of coal companies until they could afford to pay their milk and eggs and flour bills at the company stores. And when you worked hard enough, you never made enough money, and you brought chits into the company store, and that chit would buy you enough to feed your family. The rest you were indebted to the coal company for. The government believed that this song championed the thought of unionization for miners. In 1946, that didn't sit well with the House Un-American Activities Committee because unionizing was being done, they believed, by socialists. And Merle Travis was regarded with that song as being seditious. This is a decorated United States Army veteran, folk singer, that was being targeted by our own government. The album was released, but upon its release, government employees and apparatchiks for the House Un-American Activities Committee made visits all over the country to radio stations and disc jockeys, encouraging them not to play Merle Travis music because he was a threat to our nation. Jump ahead to 1955. Dad's daytime show is doing very well in the ratings. A guest for 1 week that's coming up is Merle Travis. When the day for his rehearsal arrived, Travis was a no-show. And Dad found out he was a no-show because NBC's lawyers had been visited by Jim Denny's people from the House Un-American Activities Committee suggesting that Travis not sing these songs on the show. And Merle Travis refused to do the show at all because he refused to be told what songs to sing by anybody. This was a seminal moment in show business history. Because what happened was, when Ernie Ford found this out, he gave the song to his musical director, Jack Fascinato, and said, do an arrangement for this. And 3 days later, Ernie Ford sang that song live on television for the first time. As I remember the story, the phone lines were melting off the walls. Sacks of mail couldn't be contained in the NBC offices. Ernie Ford went on tour. While he was on tour, he sang the song live for the first time at the Indiana State Fair. The decibel range was something that hadn't been recorded. When he came back to Los Angeles, he came back to record what he thought were going to be his last 2 sides for the label because he was planning on quitting. Nobody knows this. He was going to do 2 songs. He was in danger of being held liable by Capitol Records because he was 2 songs behind in his contract. Cliffy Stone took 2 songs to the label. You Don't Have to Be a Baby to Cry and 16 Tons. Ernie Ford was told flat out, if you sing this song, it'll be the end of your career. We strongly encourage you not to do this. It was written by a man seditious, a known communist sympathizer, already under investigation. If you do this, it will be the end of your career as you know it. Dad held firm. He refused to be bullied. He refused to stand down. Nevertheless, the song was put on the B-side. Now, back in these days, the B-side record was forgotten. You Don't Have to Be a Baby to Cry was number 1. We think it was a disc jockey in Kansas City that mistakenly flipped the disc. In 4 weeks, it became the single fastest-selling record in the history of the music business. In 2 months, it had reached sales of 1 million copies faster than any record in history. That is the story of 16 Tons. I'm looking over at Murph, and Murph is doing this now, so I know what that means.
So, anybody else? We have time for one more question.
Say again, what?
She wanted to know about him standing firm on having a hymn at the end of his show.
Very, very good question. Do I have a little time, Murph? Am I good? Okay, thank you. Murph is doing this. When Hometown Jamboree closed, as I mentioned earlier, it closed every night, every Saturday night after the Dance with a Hymn. When NBC talked to Dad and Cliffy Stone became the producer of the show, one of the first things that Dad and Cliffy Stone told NBC and J. Walter Thompson, we want to close every show with a hymn. Oh, no, you're not going to close. No, this is awful. We'll lose everybody. Nobody wants to sit. You're going to be sitting in sackcloth and ashes. It's entertainment. You can't do this. We're going to close every song, every show with a hymn. Not only did they stand firm, and not to bring everybody down at the end of the show and, again, put everybody in burlap and, singing songs of, it was happy music, faith-filled music. And before the end of the first season, 2/3 of the mail, we love Ernie. Boy, we love that show. I love that show that Charles Lawton did, but it's when Ernie closes with that hymn. And it became the signature moment that helped propel the Ford Show to become the most popular half-hour variety show in television. That is why he stood firm.
Oh, I think we're going to wrap up now, even though I wholeheartedly believe we could all happily be here for another couple of hours or more listening to these stories and these great tales and memories that you all have together. But for us here at the Birthplace of Country Music, Tennessee Ernie Ford is a big part of our story, too. We started in 1927, but the history and heritage of Tennessee Ernie here in Bristol is a big part of our story, too. I hope that you will come back to the museum and check out the display. It'll be here through February, through to the end of February. Of course, we have a permanent display for Tennessee Ernie Ford also, but we have extras. Please remember tomorrow, the Paramount. That's going to be a wonderful program. Definitely worth going to. You'll get another chance to ask questions there with Buck.
Come to Paramount. It's going to be fabulous.
And you'll have time to sit down and have some cake with him afterwards.
Yes. We'll be getting our pea picker on, y'all. Come on down.
Yeah. And also, on Thursday night here at the Birthplace of Country Music, we have our Farm and Fun Time show. That is sold out. Buck, however, will be here to do the heirloom recipe, sharing a Tennessee Ernie Ford recipe as part of that show. We will also be having our house band, Bill and the Bells, doing some Tennessee Ernie Ford numbers. Even if you don't have tickets, you can watch that live online on our Facebook page, so on the WBCM Radio Bristol Facebook page. So that's at 7 o'clock on Thursday night, so I'd encourage you to do that. But otherwise, it's just, remember, this is Tennessee Ernie Ford's 100th birthday tomorrow, so get excited.
Yeah, it's awesome.
And I just want to say thank you so much to Buck and Sid for being here. And I'm going to hand this back over to Sid because I know he has a few more things to say.
I've got 3. Now, if it goes beyond that, it's because I think of something else. But if I don't do 3, remind me there's 3. Buck, first of all, the Bristol Historical Association, one of the co-sponsors with the museum of this evening's conversation, has gathered together some Tennessee Ernie Ford memorabilia that...
That's that glass you took from the house when you were out there in 60.
I thought you'd forget. There's a couple of there's a couple of bulletins
Thank
in
you,
there
brother.
from
Thank you.
Anderson Street. Okay.
I was asking Sid to also remind you all about the stamps after he finished what he was doing. So I'll just remind you now that Don Ashley will have stamps afterwards for people to buy.
Don Ashley stamps, envelopes, $5. Get them.
Thank you. I knew I had 3 things, and I was afraid if I interjected one, I'd lose count. I noticed you're too smart to ask about a person's spouse, so I'll tell you about Joyce Oakley and where she is. Her son had rotator cuff surgery Friday.
Yes.
Well, I didn't mention it to them.
Well, you said something. In fact, you posted it, I think.
I know, but some of them may not have seen my post. Can I tell it again?
No, you can't. No.
Okay, she would have wrapped this gift, but she ain't here. So I did, and there it is.
Sid Oakley, what is this?
I can't help it. It's for you, and it's from me.
Am I opening this up?
Yeah, right now.
Right now?
Yep.
Would you hold that for
I
me?
can.
You can?
I can.
Okay.
I will.
Oh, there's a story I missed.
This is an original drawing, Buck. I'm not saying there aren't copies, but this is the original right here that I bought for you. It's a drawing of me.
This is incredible. Is this not fantastic? This is just, Sid Oakley, come here, man. Give me this. I love you so much. I love you too, brother. I will treasure this. This is so
Let her take a picture of that, Buck.
Well, get over here.
Now look over here. These 2 ladies go with me everywhere I go, just to take pictures. Buck, is there anything else you want to say? Because we're going to say goodbye.
I want to take just a brief moment and recognize someone who has recognized everyone else. This lady, Renee Rogers, is one of the most wonderful people that I've ever had the pleasure of meeting in my life. She's also one of the gifts that country music has. It's through Renee and through this museum and through everyone involved here that the legacy of the music we all love remains so vital to so many of us and will remain that way for so long because of this individual right here. So. And I want to thank Sid Oakley for reminding me that I always need to be concerned about fashion. I want to thank everybody for coming here, for coming out in the rain tonight. Did you all enjoy yourselves? Good, good, good. What are we doing?
I'm going to ask one final question.
Ask one final. Are we sitting down for this?
We can.
We can. Okay.
Yeah, it's a long question. Yeah, we better sit down. Oh yeah, sit on the
on the painting.
If used to dig up about 16 tons of number 9 coal, what do you reckon you'd get? That wasn't rehearsed either, Buck.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.